The glass walls of the enormous corporate tower reflected the morning sun like a mirror of power and success. Inside the building, executives rushed through polished corridors, assistants carried folders filled with important documents, and the atmosphere vibrated with ambition and competition. At the center of it all was Alejandro Vargas, a young millionaire known throughout the city for his intelligence, bold decisions, and ruthless personality. At just 32 years old, Alejandro had built a powerful business empire specializing in real estate and international investments. Many admired him, many feared him, and some quietly resented him. Alejandro believed the world belonged to the strong, the decisive, and those who never showed weakness. Compassion, in his opinion, was a luxury for people who had never fought for success. That morning was particularly important. Alejandro was preparing for what could become the biggest contract in his company's history. Representatives from an international investment group were arriving to negotiate a multi-million-dollar partnership that could expand his empire across several countries. The entire office was tense because everyone knew Alejandro expected perfection. A single mistake could mean instant dismissal. As Alejandro walked confidently through the lobby, his expensive shoes echoing on the marble floor, employees greeted him nervously. His presence always filled the building with a mixture of admiration and fear. He was tall, impeccably dressed, and carried himself like a man accustomed to controlling every situation. Near the entrance of the building, a woman was quietly cleaning the floor. Her name was Rosa Martinez. She had been working as a cleaner in the building for almost 2 years. Rosa was a humble woman in her late 40s, known by the staff for her kindness and constant smile. Life had not been easy for her. She had worked countless jobs just to support her family and pay medical bills for her elderly mother. That morning, Rosa had arrived earlier than usual because the lobby needed to be spotless for the important meeting. She carefully pushed her cleaning cart across the shiny marble floor, trying not to disturb anyone. But fate sometimes creates unexpected moments. As Alejandro walked quickly toward the elevator, reading messages on his phone, he didn't notice the small warning sign Rosa had placed on the floor after mopping. His foot slipped slightly, forcing him to grab the wall to regain balance. The entire lobby froze. Alejandro looked down, then slowly turned toward Rosa. His expression darkened. "Are you blind?" he snapped loudly, his voice echoing across the lobby. Rosa immediately stepped forward, nervous but respectful. "I'm very sorry, sir. I placed the warning sign, but maybe—" "Sorry." Alejandro interrupted coldly. "Sorry doesn't prevent accidents." Several employees pretended not to watch, but everyone was listening. "You people are unbelievable," Alejandro continued with irritation. "If you can't even clean a floor properly, maybe you shouldn't be working here at all." Rosa lowered her eyes. She had learned long ago that arguing with powerful people rarely ended well. "I apologize, sir. I'll clean it immediately." Alejandro laughed mockingly. "That's the problem," he said. "People like you always apologize after the mistake." The humiliation hung in the air. A few workers exchanged uncomfortable glances. Rosa's hands trembled slightly as she held the mop. But Alejandro wasn't finished. "Do you know how much this suit costs?" he said arrogantly, brushing imaginary dust from his sleeve. "Probably more than your entire monthly salary." The words hit Rosa like a quiet storm, but she remained silent. Just then, the elevator doors opened and Alejandro stepped inside without another glance, leaving behind an atmosphere of tension and discomfort. As the elevator doors closed, Rosa slowly continued cleaning the floor. Her eyes looked tired, but she forced herself to remain calm. She needed the job too much to risk any conflict. What Alejandro didn't know was that this small moment would soon change everything. Upstairs, the boardroom had been prepared with extreme precision. A massive table stood in the center, surrounded by leather chairs and large windows overlooking the city skyline. Alejandro entered the room, greeted by his assistant Clara. "Everything is ready, Mr. Vargas," she said nervously. "The representatives will arrive in 15 minutes. "Good," Alejandro replied confidently. This deal was crucial. If the negotiations succeeded, his company would secure a contract worth nearly $50 million. But there was something else Alejandro never spoke about openly. Despite his wealth and success, his relationship with his mother, Isabella Vargas, was complicated. Isabella had built a respected career as a business consultant known for her wisdom and strategic vision. Years ago, she had helped Alejandro start his first company. However, as Alejandro became more powerful, he began to believe he no longer needed anyone's guidance, not even his mother's. Recently, Isabella had been working as a senior advisor for the same international investment group that was about to meet Alejandro today. Neither of them expected how the day would unfold. Back in the lobby, Rosa finished cleaning and slowly pushed her cart toward the service hallway. She tried to forget the humiliation, but the words kept echoing in her mind. Still, Rosa believed something important. Dignity comes from how you treat others, not how much money you have. Upstairs, Alejandro confidently prepared his presentation. Minutes later, the boardroom doors opened. 3 representatives from the international group entered, and behind them walked a woman Alejandro knew very well. His mother, Isabella Vargas. She looked elegant and composed, holding a folder filled with documents. Alejandro's confident smile froze. "Mother," he said with surprise. Isabella looked at him calmly. "Good morning, Alejandro," she replied. But what Alejandro didn't know yet was that just minutes earlier, Isabella had witnessed something in the lobby that would change the course of this entire negotiation. And the biggest contract of his career was now hanging by a very fragile thread. The atmosphere inside the boardroom suddenly felt heavier. Alejandro Vargas stood frozen for a brief moment when he saw his mother enter with the representatives of the International Investment Group. His confident expression quickly returned, but deep inside he felt a strange discomfort. Alejandro had not expected Isabella Vargas to be involved in this negotiation. Although she had always been one of the most respected business consultants in the industry, he had convinced himself long ago that he no longer needed her guidance. Isabella walked calmly toward the table with the same elegance that had always defined her presence. She greeted the other executives politely before finally looking at Alejandro. Her eyes were calm, but there was something different in them today, something observant, something thoughtful. "Alejandro," she said with a small nod. "Mother," Alejandro replied, forcing a professional smile. "I didn't know you were part of this delegation." "One never stops working in this world," Isabella answered calmly. "Today I represent the advisory board of the investment group." The 3 foreign representatives took their seats while assistants served coffee and distributed documents. The contract being discussed was enormous. It would allow Alejandro's company to expand into several international markets, something he had been chasing for years. Alejandro began his presentation with the confidence that had made him famous in the business world. Charts appeared on the large screen behind him, showing growth projections, investment strategies, and expansion plans. His voice was firm and persuasive. "Our company has demonstrated consistent growth for the last 7 years," Alejandro explained. "This partnership would allow both parties to reach markets that are currently untapped." The representatives listened carefully. They were impressed by the numbers, the preparation, and the potential profits. But Isabella remained silent. Her eyes occasionally shifted toward the window, as if she were thinking about something else. Alejandro continued speaking, unaware that his mother was replaying a scene she had witnessed just minutes earlier in the lobby. She had arrived earlier than the other representatives and had been waiting near the entrance when she saw Alejandro slip slightly on the wet floor. She saw Rosa apologize respectfully, and she heard every word Alejandro said afterward. "People like you." Those words had echoed in Isabella's mind ever since. For her, business had never been only about numbers. It was about character. Back in the boardroom, Alejandro finished his presentation confidently. "And that," he concluded, "is why this partnership would be mutually beneficial." The room remained silent for a moment. Then one of the investors nodded slowly. "Impressive proposal, Mr. Vargas," he said. "Your company's growth is undeniable." Alejandro felt the familiar rush of victory. This deal was practically secured. But then Isabella finally spoke. "There is one factor we must still evaluate," she said calmly. Alejandro looked at her, slightly confused. "What factor?" he asked. Isabella folded her hands gently on the table. "Leadership character." The room grew quiet again. Alejandro forced a small smile. "Mother, this negotiation is about business strategy." "Exactly," Isabella replied. "And leadership is part of business strategy." One of the investors looked curious. "Could you elaborate, Ms. Vargas?" he asked. Isabella nodded slightly. In large partnerships like this one, she explained, we are not only investing in a company. We are investing in the person who leads it. Alejandro's confidence began to fade slightly. Isabella continued calmly. This morning, before the meeting, I witnessed something interesting in the lobby. Alejandro's stomach tightened. The investors leaned forward, listening. A woman was cleaning the floor, Isabella said. She accidentally caused a small inconvenience. Alejandro felt the room closing in around him. But instead of being treated with respect, Isabella continued. She was humiliated. The words landed like thunder in Alejandro's mind. The investors exchanged glances. Why is this relevant? One of them asked. Isabella looked directly at her son. Because how someone treats those who have no power reveals their true character. Silence filled the room again. Alejandro tried to defend himself. It was just a minor incident, he said quickly. Nothing important. But Isabella shook her head slowly. On the contrary, she said softly. It reveals everything. Alejandro had faced many negotiations before, but never one that felt like this. Isabella stood up slowly. However, she continued, I also believe people can recognize their mistakes. The investors waited. Isabella looked at Alejandro again. If this partnership is to move forward, she said calmly, I would like to see how Mr. Vargas handles that situation. Alejandro suddenly understood. His pride resisted the idea. Apologize to a cleaner? In front of investors? But he also knew something else. If he refused, the contract could disappear. For the first time in years, Alejandro felt something unfamiliar. Humility. After a long moment of silence, he stood up. Excuse me, he said. Without another word, Alejandro left the boardroom and walked quickly toward the elevator. Minutes later, he reached the lobby again. Rosa was still there, quietly organizing her cleaning supplies. When she saw Alejandro approaching, she immediately looked nervous. But something about him was different this time. He stopped a few steps away. For a moment, he struggled to speak. Then he said quietly, Señora, I owe you an apology. Rosa looked surprised. Alejandro took a breath. What I said earlier was disrespectful, he admitted. You were simply doing your job. I should not have spoken to you that way. The lobby workers watched silently. Rosa looked at him with gentle eyes. It's all right, sir, she said softly. Everyone has difficult mornings. But Alejandro shook his head. No, he said. Respect should not depend on someone's position. For the first time that day, Rosa smiled. And upstairs, Isabella was watching through the lobby cameras displayed on a security screen. One of the investors smiled slightly. Well, he said, that is a leader who can learn. Minutes later, Alejandro returned to the boardroom. The atmosphere felt lighter. Isabella looked at him with a small, proud smile. The lead investor closed the contract folder. Mr. Vargas, he said, we are pleased to move forward with this partnership. Alejandro felt a wave of relief. The contract, worth millions, was secured. But more importantly, he had learned something far more valuable. Respect. Later that evening, as the office emptied and the sun began to set behind the skyscrapers, Alejandro walked through the lobby again. Rosa was finishing her shift. He stopped and said kindly, Thank you for your hard work today. She smiled. And upstairs, Isabella watched from her office window with quiet satisfaction. Because sometimes the most important lessons in life arrive in the simplest moments.